Hello, I'm Seth Clevenger, Managing Editor of Features and Multimedia at Transport Topics. Thank you for tuning in to our latest Transport Topics webinar, your guide to freight fraud and cybersecurity. Today, we're going to take a close look at the growing problems of fraud and cybercrime in the freight transportation industry and consider how trucking and logistics companies can better protect themselves from these threats. So, here with me today to discuss this very important topic is Dr. Erika Voss, Vice President of Information Security at DAT Freight Analytics, our program sponsor. Welcome, Erika.
Welcome, Seth. Thank you so much for having me.
So, let's start this conversation just by outlining the problem. So, we all know there are many forms of fraud in the trucking industry. This is everything from well organized criminals that are using pretty sophisticated social engineering tactics to commit identity theft and cargo theft, as well as bad actors within the industry who carry out double brokering schemes, folks who hold loads hostage. Just to give a few examples of the things that are happening out there in the market today, and especially in these past few years. So, when you look at fraud in our industry, Erica, how do you view the scope of this problem, and what are the types of fraud that you're actively working to prevent?
Yeah, it's such a great question. The types of frauds that are out there is one, first and foremost, you have to understand fraud is attacking everyone. It's not just, hitting our transportation industry, it's hitting the banking industry, it's hitting, the e-commerce industry. It's fraud's a problem everywhere. And I think that's the piece, first and foremost, we have to really understand. The challenge around that is when you think about fraud, it's understanding there are people who are paid literally to be fraudsters. There are people who get paid very substantial salaries and are incentivized to actually come attack companies or attack particular industries. And that's a hard pill for us to swallow when you think about how to put the right protections in place and actually protect your company as well as your customers. So when you think about what fraud is doing, it's more so or less it's how are you looking at your detections, your alerting, your protections, things that are actually what I like to call your cyber hygiene basics. It's building that foundation to say, hey, how are we making sure that not only are we stopping people from walking through our front door, but how do we make sure that our house, more so or less, is also secure? Much like you think about your house in that scenario, you have cameras to actually see who's coming up to your front door. You might have a dog in your backyard that's going to bark. I mean, that's the same thing we have to think about with fraud. Fraud is trying to attack every company. How are we going to protect our front door? And so when I think about the types of fraud that's out there for me from a DAT perspective, I literally have to think of every type of scenario. There's 8 different types of fraudsters that are out there that range from the socio and economic fraudster that wants to get the notoriety to see what they can do once they get inside a company or even can break through a company's door. And then there's the one that, I worry about the most, which is the gig style of fraudster, which is the one who literally gets paid to come attack companies. They do it because one, they want both the notoriety to see what they can do and basically gamify that, on a dark web monitoring load board or on a dark web monitoring, hack board or whatever, which, board they want to call it, and say, wow, I was able to breach this company, or I was able to steal credentials, or I was able to phish a company. And so those are the types of fraudsters I worry about most. And those are the ones that I'm building, advanced level detections and alerting and protections around. How do we actually do, fraud detection even better?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's important for everyone to understand that, you know, some of these folks are pretty sophisticated. Some of this is very much organized crime. This is not just, necessarily a hacker in somebody's basement,
Yeah, and I
doing
love
this
that question.
on a lark.
Exactly.
Some are, but
Exactly. And I love that question when you say that, when the statement about it's not just a hacker. And I think that's the preconceived notion is that we get worried about is, if you have something that, targets you, or if you have something that's hitting you from an organized crime standpoint, we believe we're being hacked, or we believe we're being destroyed or taken down. Like we use these really catastrophic words with very powerful meanings when it's like, what are we actually doing to stop this organized crime, association or group or company or fraudsters out there that are hundreds of thousands of people even in some of these organized crime retail theft things that are actually coming at us. And then you have to think about, again, it's hard from a cyber perspective because we have to think like a bad actor and how would I be able to get in. And then once we do that model or build that capability or protection or detection, then you also have to think one step ahead of like, okay, now what are we going to do to mitigate against that type of attack that could hit us, knowing there's a large group out there that is trying to also build 10 more steps ahead of the one step we're also trying to protect.
yeah, no doubt. And when you look at what's happening in the marketplace right now in the freight industry, what are some of the latest trends you're seeing in the types of scams and fraud that are actually happening today? Are there any emerging tactics that you're watching closely?
Yeah, the big ones I continue to see, it's definitely double brokering, it's definitely compromised accounts, it's definitely phishing attacks that are hitting people really well. Impersonation is another big thing, account impersonation. These are the big ones. These are the big ones that continue to hit the freight industry or continue to hit us from a fraud perspective. And I say us in the terms of the industry perspective. And those are the hard ones to combat against, because if you have one account that gets, compromised, that one account, could turn into being 100 accounts being compromised. It's how fast you actually respond to that one account being compromised versus how fast your spread can be inside your network. And that's hard if you don't understand what that sprawl could look like, or what I call that attack landscape could look like to you. It's hard to build your protections and detections around that to actually make sure you're more secure.
Yeah. And this issue of fraud, I think, is so impactful because the transportation industry is really built on trust, right?
Sure.
Trust among carriers, shippers,
Yeah.
and brokers. These companies all depend on each other to move freight. They need to know who each other are. There's a level of trust that needs to be there. And of course, as a load board operator, DAT, is very much right at the nexus of these freight transactions. Right in
Yes.
the middle. So just take a moment to describe how DAT specifically is working to enhance security and network governance to help mitigate fraud and really foster the trust that the freight market is built upon.
Yeah, the big thing that I think is really great and powerful is, DAT has made security their number one priority. I mean, separate from, hiring executive level leadership like myself coming into there, it's we're taking a look at our network, we're taking a look at our integrity of our operations. We've enabled multi-factor authentication. We're looking at how we can reduce the number of incidents that are hitting our compromised accounts. We're vetting new accounts every day that are joining our DAT platform. We do a massive amount of education and training. That's something I'm probably the most passionate about, is like, we've got to get out there and help our customers and teach them how to protect themselves better. We cooperate with law enforcement. I mean, it's not just your local law enforcement. It's, partnering with your FBI, it's partnering with, other freight carriers out there and sharing that information, and getting involved in different things with Department of Homeland Security or Department of Transportation or, the FMCSA. You have to get out there and start talking about how bad the fraud is, and then start partnering together and sharing, the tips and the tricks and the best practices. It really comes down to that education and training more than anything. And then outside of that, I mean, we have some really great, powerful initiatives around, some of the products that we're doing and how we're advancing those things. And I think that's really what's going to move the needle for DAT. I mean, the big thing for me that I think is really powerful is, I love what DAT is doing and how they're really making a strong investment in security. But for me, it really comes down to trust. I think it's, you don't want to have not only just security, but I think that really needs to change in the narrative standpoint, is talk about what does it mean to have trust? Like, it's great that I'm a chief security officer, but for me, it's more about customer trust. And so I would rather be viewed as the chief trust officer and go continue to partner with our customers and build that transparency and that trust, and really, ignite cyber to be just another core function that we can bring to the table, along with valuing our customer and their trust first. That's what's key.
That's great. And I also want to get into some of the best practices you alluded to in just a little bit here. But I do think it's really interesting. When you joined DAT at the beginning of the year, you became the company's first executive level information security officer. And when you look at the transportation industry more broadly, that's a pretty new development, right? To see information security become such a high priority. I
Right.
mean, sure, there are plenty of CIOs and CTOs at motor carriers and 3PLs really across our industry. But as you think about the importance of cybersecurity, uh, do you envision more of these high level executive roles focused specifically on IT security starting to emerge at trucking and logistics companies in the years ahead?
Yeah, I hope that it is really. And I think if companies are not looking at the sheer aspect of their, their technology foundation or their digital transformation, they're willing to invest in the CIO and the CTO, which is great. But if you're not investing in security, the problem is, I'm going to say very candidly, it's not if you get hacked, it's when you get hacked, because you will get hit. And I think that's the reality that people need to understand, is you need to start investing in cybersecurity. And if you're not investing in it today, you should have invested in it 10 years ago. I'm not going to tell you go invest in the future. I'm going to ask you, why are you not doing it now? I've met with a variety of customers since I've joined this industry. And honestly, very transparently, it is mind blowing to me how many people I talk to that are very much like, well, I'll have you talk to my network IT person. Network IT and cybersecurity are two very different things. It's two very different types of attack landscapes. And it's like, you have to take a point and you really need to understand you have an attack landscape. There's a model you need to want to follow. There's frameworks out there that are going to help us. And like everybody wants to complain about having a fraud problem, but when I ask you if you have a cybersecurity person I can talk to help you build your protections or understand your attack landscape or your threat intelligence, and you look at me like I'm crazy, I'm going to look right back at you and go, then don't talk to me about your fraud problem. I mean, that's the reality. Fraud is rampant in our industry, and we're talking about vetting the right carriers, and we're looking at doing solutions and stuff, but we're not willing to invest in actually getting the right cyber talent to help you attack this space correctly.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and I think that the industry has really started to understand that you're not going to fly below the radar. You might be a mid-sized company, like not really known by the public at large, all that well, but you can absolutely be a target.
Yes.
Maybe the public doesn't see you or think about you that much, but cyber criminals see you and they see you as an opportunity. You might even be low-hanging fruit if you're not investing.
Correct.
So don't think that you're going to escape this issue. Unfortunately, I think it's something that everybody has to be investing in and prepared for.
Yeah, and you'll find
Now, I think
any cyber person you talk to, they're going to ask you, what is your feelings on, an attack or a breach or being hacked, and everyone's going to tell you it's not if, it's when. It's a timing game. You are literally playing a
yeah,
timing game.
yeah. And I think it'd be fascinating, Erica, just to hear a little bit more about the type of work that you do on a day to day basis, right? An executive level IT security officer. So I imagine you're balancing your time working with DAT staff on initiatives, consulting with your customers, and also just addressing security issues as they arise, emerging issues and trends. So
Yeah.
tell me, what's a typical day of work like for you these
Yeah.
days?
I That's probably one of my best questions I always love to answer. Like the typical day is it's really like having context switching all day long. I could start off my day talking about risk management and how, we want to drive down risks so that, we're having better protections in place, and then jump into a meeting with, let's talk about, do we have the right detections? And I want to be able to have, alerts or, what I call mean time to detect in milliseconds. And people are like, I don't even understand what that means. And I was like, as fast as the alert comes in, I want us to take action against it. And then I'll jump to my next conversation, which is, hey, we want to go partner with the government. And then I turn into talking about compliance controls and what does it mean to do work with government entities. Or then the next conversation talks about with, hey, we want to onboard this new vendor. And I was like, here's the vendor risk management around that. And what are we doing with some of our third parties? And are we looking at, the types of compliance and controls? And I mean, the day is just, it's context switching all day long, but it's also thinking about every conversation I go into. And this is something I pride myself on, is like I think about, if the customer is sitting in the room with me, like what would they say? What would they be asking? And that's how I approach every conversation, which is this cyber as a service mindset, which is really, I have to think about, one, protecting my company first and foremost, but the biggest thing is protecting the customer. So if I'm implementing a change or if I'm putting a detection, does that help both DAT, but does it also help my customer? Does it help me reach out to them proactively and say, hey, we're seeing this type of threat intelligence coming through our supply chain. Are you aware of it? And if not, let me help you get aware of it. And here's the things we're seeing. And building that proactive engagement is really what's going to be incredible for me, but also like that's the thing that I thrive on for us, is like just myself on a day-to-day basis, is I want to be proactive with our customers. I want to get out there and teach them, how to look for things and how to understand the type of attacks that are hitting them. I mean, we're working in an industry that is, Joe or Sally who are still driving down the road operating with a clipboard and maybe, a smartphone in their hand, but like that's it. Like it's not, telling them to understand multi-factor or telling them to, not click on a link, but then I'm going to send you a link with a code, to help you get into an application. Like that doesn't make sense. And so driving that educational cyber as a service mindset and teaching them that customer training piece, and helping them really understand what that day looks like for them, is my day-to-day thing. It's how do I make it easier for my customer.
Sounds like you're one of those folks that just never has a boring day of work,
Never
which
do.
in the field that you're in, right, right. Uh, and you're certainly right that the trucking industry is so fragmented. So much of the work is done by small businesses, medium-sized businesses. So there's so many folks who need to understand this, right? It's not like there's just 10 players and they all need to be informed. It's so many small businesses that are all potential targets and all need to protect themselves from various forms of fraud. Now, I do want to spend some time here talking about best practices that our viewers can actively implement at their own companies. And I hear time and time again, including from you on this during this conversation, that employee education and training are really just absolutely crucial for cybersecurity and fraud prevention. So, what advice would you offer on how to make that type of training and education as effective as possible?
Yeah, the biggest thing to do is make it fun, make it engaging. It's hard enough as it is to like freak out and say, "Oh my gosh, we're being hacked or we're being attacked in some capacity or another." But it's also kind of like you've got to make it to where the user can understand what is happening. You've got to make it to where it like validates to them that it can like hit home. And so for example, one of the things I do when I talk about, education awareness and training on just like having good cyber practices is I ask people, do you have children? When children get online, are you aware of what they're doing when they get online? Like you could implement, safety practices on your smartphone or on your iPad or on, your digital device that you have, your IoT device. And like just by flipping a switch or sliding over, an icon, little like handle, so to speak. And it's like, those are the things we care about. We care about making sure our stuff is being protected, or we care about our money. Like when we log into a bank, we do want to make sure we have multi-factor turned on, or we biometric scan our face type thing. Those things are really powerful to us. That's how doing education, awareness, and training should be. It has to be fun. It has to be engaging. They have to be able to relate to it. Otherwise, you're going to lose your audience, first and foremost. That is the big thing. If you cannot connect with your audience, taking training is just going to be that. It's going to be like, oh, I got to go take this training. Let me show up in the conference room. I'm going to like log into my computer because I'm mandated to do it. It's not any fun. We're not learning anything. And so being able to actually build a training module that actually makes sense to people where they can relate to it is really going to be powerful for you. That's the first and foremost thing. And then really figuring out in some level, how do you kind of do what I like to do as a gamification? How do you gamify it? Like, hey, we're going to have, 5 different teams, like ops teams inside our company. Like, let's see which ops team can get the training done faster at 100% rate, in a certain time frame. And like, I'll buy you all pizza, or I'm going to take you all to breakfast. Like, people want to have like some sort of fun competition. And if you can do that, that becomes really fun for people when they want to take the training.
Yeah, well, great advice there. And when you consider the types of fraud and the types of bad actors that do exist in our industry, what would you say are some of the best ways for carriers and brokers to effectively vet the companies that they choose to work with, right, and make sure they're choosing the right partners?
Yeah, the biggest thing is definitely, first and foremost, it's the wording you literally say. Vet your carrier. Like, make sure the person you're working with actually has, a valid address. It's not a PO box. Make sure they have a valid phone number. Make sure you're actually looking and ensuring where they're operating from is in the right country or the right location. Like, you actually know your contact of who you're actually working with.
Yeah.
Multi-factor authentication. I'm always going to talk about that, or two-factor authentication. If you have an authenticator app which you can download to your smartphone, whether it's Google or Microsoft or whichever app is out there, like having that authenticator app is really powerful because it's another layer of protection. That's how I think about it, is what are those layers of defense. Those are the things you need to do, and then just go one step further every time. Is pay attention to what are the types of frauds that are going out there. Are you following along with threat intelligence? Are you actually looking at how are you building, which is like the core foundation, your right detections, your right alerts? And if you see something, do you actually say something? Do you actually report it? And if you do, like, spreading that awareness and spreading that communication is what's going to become really powerful to actually protect you. And like, those are the core foundations you have to start with. And then I mean, you could go deep into the technology and say, make sure your systems are patched, make sure you have the right email protections in place, and you're not having a business email compromise, or you're not having, a phishing attack happen. I mean, you have to look at those things and make sure you're really pausing and taking a look. If you go to click on a link, is that link really valid?
Yeah. So beyond education and training and vetting the companies you work with, it's also important, of course, for companies to understand their vulnerabilities. And one of the approaches there are security audits, to help companies address their weaknesses and improve their stance on cybersecurity. So maybe just speak to the importance of security audits and how those can really improve your stance on security.
Yeah, security audits are going to be one of the most powerful things you have out there. You're going to ask a company, do they have a cybersecurity framework that they're using, which most people, hopefully this day and age, are using, the NIST cybersecurity framework. It's industry standard. It's available to you free. It tells you the way to set up your controls and set up your security, environments, and how you can actually look at it. And you should want to be able to come in and talk to your customer, talk to your company and say, how are you doing detection and alerting? How are you doing identity access management? How are you looking at the way you provision accounts or deprovision accounts? How are you actually doing monitoring? Like, where are you collecting logging? Like, all these things actually matter, and it, like, just walks you through a very common framework. And so when you have an audit, that gives you the capability to say, hey, how are you meeting these controls? How do I know that you are doing the best and investing the most in your security posture to make sure that I don't get hit with either a fraud type of an attack, which again, there's a separate challenge around, having a compromised account and what that means. But like, the audit is going to make sure that that company you're working with is doing all the right security protections, and they're doing all the right security compliance, and they're leveraging the framework that's going to make them industry best in class. Those are the things you should be looking for, and those are the companies you're really going to want to spend the
Yeah.
time with, that's saying, hey, I am welcome to have you come sit down at my table and let's walk through how I meet those basic controls and how we could do advanced controls together. I mean, that's really the company I want to go work with, is the one who's doing those implementations right out of the gate.
Yeah. I think we've covered a lot of ground here, but what are some other best practices for fraud prevention and cybersecurity that we haven't already discussed?
Yeah, I think the big thing is it's going to come down to how much you actually report it. We suffer from a fraud, perspective, and we're all
Yeah.
talking about fraud in many different times of, ways and shapes and forms and how it's hitting us. But you have to make sure you report it first and foremost. That's the biggest thing. Report it to law enforcement, to the FBI, to Department of Homeland Security. They have an entire, Operation Boiling Point group that is really trying to tackle, supply chain fraud across the globe. Like, you've got to get out there and share all these things of what's going on. And then we need to be better just as an industry to share the types of frauds we're seeing. We have to use threat intelligence to help, evangelize us coming together as a community. That's how you're going to actually tackle fraud. We're not going to tackle fraud by solving it with a bunch of technology. You're going to tackle it by sharing best practices together. Like, that's the thing I think is probably the biggest thing that we sometimes need to forget, is at the end of the day, we're all trying to fight the fraud and combat the fraud, but we need to share how we're seeing the fraud hit each other. We need to share how it's actually attacking us and what they're doing and what are the types of, alerts and detections that we are looking at to help us come together. And, if I had a crystal ball, I would love to see us build a center of excellence around how we're actually doing supply chain fraud. It's great when you follow things going on in the industry with laws and bills, and we're going to stand up another task force. I don't need another task force. I need you to help me stop the fraud that's hitting me today. And that's the big thing that I think we want to do, is just communicate and share those best practices, and then talk about ways that we could do multi-factor together. Talk about ways that, we could actually make sure accounts are not being compromised. And here's where we're seeing a large amount of bad actors coming in from, let's say, Ukraine, or, from Singapore. It's like, what are we doing with that information? I don't need to keep it to myself. I should be telling my customers, hey, here's an IP range, or hey, here's a group of, types of fraudsters that are hitting us. I want to proactively share it with you all. So if you have security people in place, or security teams, or now you want to think about probably hopefully hiring a security person, you can use this information to your advantage. Like, be proactive together. We have to come together stronger and tighter as a community if we're going to actually protect our industry.
Yeah, and of course, in addition to reporting to the authorities, I also, being in the trade press, I certainly appreciate the companies that have been willing to speak publicly about their experiences.
Yes.
It's not an easy thing to talk about. If you're a carrier, if you're a 3PL, and you've undergone a big cyber attack that really disrupted your operations, and that you might think is yes, it's difficult to talk about. Maybe that's embarrassing in some ways, but the folks who have been willing to step forward and talk about those experiences, I think, have really raised a lot of awareness in our industry. Industry
Yeah.
panels, conversations I've had in the
Yeah.
past, and news stories, and that really helps others learn because on this issue, yes, we're in a very competitive industry in trucking, but on this issue, everybody should be on the same side.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And that's the thing that's really going to matter. I mean, I've been on both sides, where I've been in a breach, and then I've also been the one investigating a breach, and it's hard and it's challenging. But at the end of the day, it's like talking about how I was hit or how we were hit. And I'm not saying DAT, but like, I'm just saying in general, from an industry perspective, it's hard to come out there and talk about it. But like, when you can, and you can share that with other companies, it becomes powerful. Like, again, it comes back to that crystal ball of building that center of excellence. But it's also that part too of, you need to go hire an Erica. You need to go hire a security person. If you are any type of company, I mean, I get it. Not every small mom and pop shop is going to be able to afford a security analyst or a security engineer, but then find somebody you can work with. I tell everybody, I love what I do and I would do what I do for free because my job is to go out there and help protect the company and help protect our customers. And so I'm always willing to get on a phone or willing to get on, a Zoom call and help people talk about what are some ways we could be better together. That's really what's going to be powerful for it. And I think that's the piece that really is going to hit home with people is you need to think about security all the time. Security is talked about all the time. It's not some taboo word anymore. It's how do we get better together? That's really what it needs to be.
Yeah, hopefully that will continue. And just kind of looking back and last several years, I'd say that maybe the biggest nightmare, right? The most severe cybersecurity threats that our industry have seen have generally been ransomware attacks, right? These are
Correct.
highly sophisticated hackers that break into a company's IT systems, encrypt them, and then demand payment to unlock
Yep.
everything. We've
Yep.
seen quite a few examples of that, unfortunately, in the last several years. And uh, I'm just curious your perspective on this. What are the key vulnerabilities that trucking companies, from your perspective, need to address to prevent those types of very damaging cyber attacks, and also what type of recovery plans should they have in place in case a breach like that does occur?
Yeah, the big thing I always tell people is make sure you have some type of business continuity, disaster recovery plan. Make sure your entire leadership team understands that there needs to be an incident response plan and how you would actually, defend against it, but also exercise against that plan. If you were to truly have a ransomware attack, it's, every cyber professional would probably tell you, you find out how great your leadership team is or how great your company is during the attack. And it's painful because that's when people are pulling out a plan and they're realizing, oh my gosh, we're missing this or we're missing that. And so you really have to do a tabletop exercise or you really have to do exercising with your leadership team, with your IT teams, with your security teams. So everybody understands when a ransomware attack actually hits you, like the amount of speed that ransomware attack is going to take place is going to like catapult you on a level that is going to probably actually like scare the crap out of you, to be candid with you. A ransomware attack is it's happening because, and this is a big thing I harp on, is because you have poor cyber hygiene. If someone is able to get into your system, it's because something is not patched. It's because a port is open. It's because somebody was social engineered. It comes down to us not being good around, again, nailing the basics, education, awareness, and training.
Yeah,
Those are the things that are actually what's hitting companies, and those are the type of ransomware attacks. When you go out there and look, these hospitals are being hit. Why? They have tech debt. They're old infrastructure. Schools are being
yeah,
hit, tech debt and old infrastructure. If you look at like our trucking industry as a whole, a lot of these companies that are been around a long time, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, guarantee they're running on old infrastructure and now people are wanting to move to the cloud. You have to think about how do you address that tech debt. You can't do all the amazing cool shiny stuff with also not addressing your tech debt and having good cyber hygiene. So it's a hard pill to swallow, but you're never going to protect yourself against ransomware if you're also not nailing the basics and having a good cyber posture. You have to make sure systems are patched. You have to make sure identity access management is in place. If you have, people leaving for competitors, you want to make sure that you're walking them out the door, pay them the 2 weeks. Don't let your data go out with that person just because you keep them around for 2 weeks because you think they're a critical person. Insider threat is a real thing you have to think about this day and age. And so it's hard because we want to believe everybody's here great. And I'll be the first to say, I assume positive intent, but I also have to think about the risk of an attack and the risk of a bad actor. And so I'm constantly having to play the what if game. What if this happened? What if this hit me? What if we were under a ransomware attack? What steps would I take very quickly to try to stop the attack and, keep things from spreading as quick as possible when that attack from a ransomware perspective has probably already hit your network and encrypted and locked you out before you could probably even get 5 people on a room or on a call.
great. No, it is amazing how fast moving some of those attacks can be based on what I've heard from folks who have gone through it. And I appreciate the insights on that. And I
Yeah.
also want to hear your thoughts on another big trend that's happening in the software development and technology world. And that's the rise of artificial intelligence, right? Of course,
Yes.
it's not new, but we've seen a real leap forward in the capabilities and the cost effectiveness for potentially for AI developers. And of course, this has some real ramifications for security as well. So, how do you envision AI and machine learning helping to mitigate fraud and cyber threats in the future? Of course, hackers could also use these tools, but how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you said. I think there's an incredible opportunity to build the right AI and ML models around, the types of fraud predictions or, analytics that you could actually pull together, looking at your own data and what are the type of attacks. I think if everybody could partner with a data science person or actually get together with your data analytics team and look at the way that there's behavioral, analytics around it, I mean, you're going to be able to build fraud models, which I think could be really powerful for you. And that's where I think AI and ML could be, really incredible for companies trying to actually combat fraud. The flip side is exactly what you just said. You have, bad actors and hackers and attackers out there that are also looking at how they can use AI against you to attack you again faster, how they can, leverage a way to have, an LLM or other types of capabilities to come hit you in a way that you're not even thinking about because if you're somebody like me who's thinking about the what if game of having, strong technology and strong defense in depth layers, I now have to think about, oh my gosh, now I have technology that's going to be used against me. And so I have to be up to date on that technology and
Yeah.
understand the type of attack vectors. And so that's the challenge around it. I do think there's incredible strength in having AI. I think you just have to have good risk management and understanding what you want to use AI for and how it should be used from an ethical standpoint.
Yeah. That's all great to think about as we move to this brave new world, I suppose. But
Yeah.
I see we're short on time here, Erica. But before we wrap up here, I would like to finally just open it up to any parting thoughts you'd like to share with our viewers. We've covered a lot of ground here, but any final words, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the big thing for me from a final thought perspective is folks, please go talk and ask your, IT team, how are they looking at detections? How are they thinking about, if an attack was to hit you or if there was a compromised account, like what can we do better to share that information? How can we come together better as a community to really look at the intelligence that's out there and, how do we really come together as one industry and like figure out how we're going to solve for it? A big push for me is, I talk a lot about having zero trust transportation, which is I want you to constantly be authenticating with me all the time. When we can reach that level of trust together as a community, as an industry, we're going to be really powerful together to stop the fraud.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to a great place to leave it there. This has been a really insightful conversation about what is a increasingly important topic for trucking and logistics companies that we all need to be paying attention to. So, thank you once again, Erica, for joining the program and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Really appreciated the conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Seth, again for having me. It was really fun. Appreciate it.